He is someone who spends an enormous amount of time thinking about craft, about the relationship between sound and sense in his work. I think you're going to really enjoy his work, and I'd like you to give him a warm welcome. Michael Thomas.
I'm going to read about 8 poems from a book-length manuscript that it's been shopped around, hasn't been bought yet, but it will, I hope. And the title, recently revised, the book is Not a Mirror. And the title comes from a phrase by the poet Faiz Ahmed Faiz, Pakistani poet, who was translated by a teacher of mine, the Kashmiri poet Agha Shahid Ali. And the stanza that the title comes from is this: "Don't leave now that you're here. Stay, so the world may become like itself again, so the sky may be the sky, the road a road, and the glass of wine not a mirror, just a glass of wine." And the poems I've chosen to read tonight, I think, are linked thematically in some way. I think you'll hear that. This first poem is called Sundar. It's for my twin brother. A lanky, soft body, born with predilections, left knee raised, the one his mother knew long before birth, left hand raised to his shoulder. My twin cradles him in green stained glass light. We sing together, off key. For 2 days prior to his birth, I felt something break inside of me. But with my twin brother's hands, placing the baby in mine, a ritual pace, I see up close the roundness of his eyes, feel the early, surprising gravity in his spine. Sundar looks and looks up at me. His arms rest back. My childless contentment, the dark center of my neighbor's orange poppies. This is called The Oranges. Rory, on his redwood child stool, leans into his mother's flowered silk robe while she presses pulp and deep orange out from each half sphere, which he then hooks into the trail of the used. Across the countertop, they form this caterpillar sequence. The sun comes in from the east window over the sink onto them. It is as if there is no purpose beyond the work of watering, and no drink his mother presses for, her distilling, his connecting. But is it possible, at 3 years old, somewhere in the hand's muscles, this boy learns how we hook each new loss into the others until our lives appear a sequence of extracted halves to which we persist in returning until we can go no further. Niece and Pool. A lot of these poems, as you'll hear, begin with an image that I see or that makes a deep impression on me, and then it stays with me usually. And then I take the poem into composition with the image and the memory of the image. Niece and Pool. The long coastal hours. The sky makes him think he could have a child of his own. Through early summer wings and green, the bird hovered at the window, ducking toward purple trailing petunias, until it discovered that it was separated from the flowers by glass. Gone before he could realize fully what it was. Gone as he knew what it was or had become. They sit a long time in the raft, transition to depths, a pump's hum, sudden, almost beyond the foot's control. How quickly we slip into our lives' momentum. Those brief, casual distances. She looks skyward and dips her fingers with our lull of stories and questions. She might collect that late light, jewels on her arm, or wrinkles for him, if it followed her motions, surface-bound. Afternoon lifts its bow from warm, worn strings until it is quiet again for them to rise, listen, and ask what other mysteries need unraveling. And the new beckons, a silvery light, escaping burst, the eases of what they can become. A child of his own, the long coastal hours. Walking with my father. He wants his walk brisk, his bus ride empty. Between the silence of a short year and the small words near the Night Street construction site, he resonates with need and wonder. Men in masks solder beams while we cross to the 8th Avenue diner. Between our steps, inside revolving doors, and between the slices of cherry pie, questions I think he might ask remain unspoken, unnatural. Hidden under the milk bottle's label, the condensation marking my hands, and between the fork tines holding my next bite, is our delinquent history, drunk promises, faint loyalty, variable amnesia. He wants to know what books he should read for his soul, and tells me how I ought to believe in some kind of God, no matter the odds. Outside, while looking between colored lights without words, he steps down off a high curb and slips so our bodies walk closer than we normally would. He wants his bus ride empty, his later years filled with more sleep, less talk. I read a newspaper headline and let him move further into the block until he notices, under a hotel's marquee, where he turns in that bright yellow glow between two bellhops rushing past each other, that I've headed for my train underground. In this poem, as with the last, sometimes poems begin when you're in conversation with someone and something they say strikes you. This has some direct quotes, and it's actually dedicated to Richard Frost. And yes, relation, Carol Frost's husband. And it's set in upstate New York at her home. And it occurred to me quickly after a conversation I had with Richard. And I didn't tell Richard or Carol why I quickly dashed off into their study and wrote the first draft of this. So sometimes it does happen that quickly. Otigo porch, lightning and eyeglasses. His one line of gold in profile from eyelash back to ear, my aging friend's white hair swirled with brown. In the first equinox darkness, the night is more an epilogue. His cigar fires a freckled red blaze. He talks about the horror and fascination in his dying friend's words, about a room in his dream that becomes an echo, except for the one television and a voice commanding, "No, this is my room." Twin pines in the yard, those tall beasts sway. The profile is a relentless posture, dishonest and cold. Or is it only this way because I want him to look at me? Then his whiskey voice and green smoke. I hope I can die like that gutter runoff. pause of falling, a dizzy swirl. These cigars with which you corrupt me every summer make me feel reverence for this rain. The folding chair opens more fully when he stands up. His white robe, the legs' momentary halo. The title of this is I Cannot. And as you may have noticed, I'm very interested in memory. And this is one image that stayed with me probably for 10 years before I actually wrote it down. And the image came from a memory, which I identify here. It comes down to one memory, a vague touch and green backyard metal railing. His delivery of us to our grandparents' building only a mile up the road. The beginning only. He was not belt-whipped cruel or anything as clear, but how to hate the blank foreground, the one half arm, darkened by his jacket that I recall. As I return to that one moment, perhaps too often told to others to permit the full shape. There was a man. I breathed. We had a yard with grass mowed by my mother, with an electric lawnmower plugged in with a long wire dripping from a side dining room window. The windows were closed the other days. In the TV production interview for Brookdale, in the conversation before, I mentioned to Laura that I started reading a lot of contemporary poets when I really was interested in poetry, and then I've moved back. And I've been lucky to have taught people like Dante and Shakespeare. And I was reading W.S. Merwin's translation of Purgatorio, which is quite beautiful, and wrote a series of poems with the same title, Purgatorial Lament. My story stitched my lead cloak. Those other pains, lined through a hell's belly, never once looked away. I understand her silence as a form of love, though her face, when I could finally see the lips, then her blue eyes, was seeped by betrayal's flashes. The stunned words my voice will never be without. Never would I anticipate my body lifted while I slept through blue stars. Sometimes I have trouble with titles, and this one I titled by the date. Easy enough, right? May 16th, 2003. Wind pulls the front door closed again as I talk, hands full of dried buds that rattle with black seeds, and a neighbor explains last night's convergence of unmarked and marked government cars. Let the cold air move its way. My twin brother's baby will be here soon. This silent corner, this trellis, where I cut away last year's vines, wiry and still resistant. A few seeds pellet the stairs. Cold air stiffens my hands. Ugly world. Beauty slants my clumsy memory. What has been can return. Thank you for listening.
Carol Frost's work has been described as saturated with urgency. Her poems, according to Dorothy Baresi, shine with a strange inner light. The work is marked by an intelligence and sensitivity that gives voice to the abstract via the natural world, using as a vehicle images that pulse and breathe, and voices that question, wonder, and at times stumble. Her poems are meditations, and they ask the reader to reconnect with the world in unexpected ways, via, for example, a mole's sexual jealousy or the envy of a cat. When you read a Carol Frost poem, there is the thrill of knowing that you are in the presence of an author whose vision is quite truly unique. To quote Elizabeth Spires in her review of Frost's work, these are poems that are pure, they are passionate, and they are brilliantly lucid. So it is with great pleasure that I introduce Carol Frost.
One evening, it wasn't that late. It was probably 11 or so, but I decided to go to bed. And my son came in from the TV room and he said, "Mom, you've got to come watch this. There's a program on. You're just going to love it. It's right up your alley." A nature program. And I said, "Take notes." So he did, and here's the poem. So I should give him credit for it, really. Daniel Frost wrote this poem. Think of the queen mole who is unequivocal, exuding a scent to keep the other females neuter, and bringing forth the colony's only babies, hairless and pink in the dark of her tunneled chamber. She may chew a pale something, a root, find it tasteless, drop it for the dreary others to take away, then demand more. She must suckle the young. Of course they all hate her and are jealous of the attention given her by her 6 bedmates. In their mutual dream she is dead, and her urine no longer arrests their maturing. As irises infallibly unfold, one of their own will feel her sex grow quickest and greatest. As they dig together, their snouts full of soil, they hope this and are ruthless in their waiting. Beauty is for amateurs. Chisel-billed, eyes cerulean, with a crimson nuptial patch, flicker lay on the ground, still warm, and went on aging. Intricate, stricken watch, pair in a desiccating wind. I brought it home and began with the box of watercolors to wash the eye with milk for the clouds and sky it fell from. Then dragged my partly dried brush over the rough paper surface for true textures on the wings, imagining old orchards, umber and sienna, where I'd seen the undulating flight of loose flocks. I studied the yellow undertail, then daubed with the colored water along the gray and dun stripes. As from my pulse I felt for temperament, for gravestone, for shadow, to effect the utter silence after a long, long day of wordle, pia, drum, and wicca. Then I blotted and scraped the throat. I saw dusk falling like a comment on each detail that led to it and gradually was lost and leaving. A hint of song must be caught, a clarity of neither light nor memory, and it must be in the physical form of the flicker and the orchard where the wind makes a soft racket, song that breaks the learned heart. I stared and stared by lamplight, stroking the white, thinking sour gum, dogwood, poison ivy berry, river mist, imagining the free side of the hills, when a bead of liquid formed in the flicker's beak and pooled on my desk. My evasions went up in smoke, with colors, tones, casements, and stars with exact names. Who could but feign the moments once lived that will never be lived again? Who has a home in this good world and doesn't yearn? I do. It's mine. I do. This is called Nothing. She turned away, and her child slid toward the ice edge of a precipice, gravity and momentum wrestling on his shoulders. She could not bear to see the outcome and was starting to pretend he did not exist, if his existence would come to an end. See, there is a snowy peak and clouds, spilling so softly they create a whirlpool of silence. She lets herself be in it. She no longer hears anything, not the wind, not the scraping shoes, not him. How she used to fret, to brush the hair back from his eyes so everyone could see his beauty and she could see the least shadow of sorrow or illness. But there is nothing left to do for him. Since the forces like acrobats keep somersaulting and playing with him, she will not hearken or give them the pleasure of her scream. Imagine, in the twilight of a river, trout rising to the hairs and netted wings of water walkers, and yourself casting a baited line toward shadows. There is no talking, and the mind learns to drift, to take in the slightest signs, as if there's already begun under the surface what will come to pass. It lures you along. Reed, ripple, raccoon scratches in the mud bank lend their wisdom and their indifference to the moments before the pole bends double, or you give up, walk to the lighted house, and join the others at a table to talk of life, love, logic and the senses, memory, promise, betrayal, character, and fate, the driving notion that around the river the magnificent fish waits, prickling the black water. Custom. As if it had forgotten everything, hatred, vindictiveness, the meaning of pain, the bull took the ribbon stick in his back without response, turning away, so that when the picador entered the ring, the crowd was making fun of the country's breeders. If there was an ounce of dignity or strength in the animal, the picador would have to find it with his pole. And he came on slowly to probe the back and shoulders deeply, cruelly like a king with a scepter. The bull barely moved until the picador gambled all and sailed his beautiful hat into the air above the lowered head. With that, the bull's will broke, and he rushed again and again like a child, a superbly angry prince at the horse's side. When it was over, the bull and its retinue gone inside to the abattoir, the picador, as was the custom, re-entered the ring. The assembly roared. By his actions they knew better who they were. Scorn. She thought of no wilder delicacy than the starling eggs she fed him for breakfast. And if he sat and ate like a farmhand, and she hated him sometimes, she knew it didn't matter, that whatever in the din of argument was harshly spoken, something else was done, soothed and patted away. When they were young, the towering fierceness of their differences had frightened her, even as she longed for physical release. Out of their mouths such curses, their hands huge, pointing, stabbing the air. How had they not been wounded? And wounded, they'd convalesced in the same rooms and bed. When at last they knew everything without confiding, fears, stinks, boiling hearts, they gave up themselves a little so that they might both love and scorn each other, and they ate from each other's hands. Black Point. I want to say oracle, seagrass, crab cluck, swollen sheep's head in a fitful sea nodding assent. I who listened for decades to familiar voicings now hear Delphic imaginings low and sweet, hallucinogenic as when the dolphin crests in early morning vapor and light mixing on water, the leap and splash thunderous, a flight of birds, one piping, syrinx in the wind, a rising sea, woman behind the bank of ice who says, no crabs today. Hours in a small boat, I converse with sea meadows, fish, human nature, look and remember. The zigzag to Black Point, Carisian Cove, with my questions, alone suddenly, in panic, luminous neck of a snake become a turtle, black and white tattered fish, then a sort of trance, beneath sense some early rune. I've traveled to hear this sound. The poet's black drum. Come in the silent acting in a dream now, wayfarer. Come back from that deepest paradise where all that haven't breath, the breathless mouth may summon. Tell us about your journey fishing. Barbels, stony teeth in the throat, aching shoulders, and what Florida locals call tailing, the drifting fleece. Drum underneath the flutter, fecund with slender parasites, beauty's flesh, tasting of waters you taste and you say light died. Blue crab. A rearing up, the pincers waved in air. By God, you better let me be. Brine bubbled at the mouth, bent foam, and current having laved the shell. Water shouldering, saturnal, deranged in a wire trap. An inverted funnel like a halved hourglass. 10 legs makeshift on land. How far life reaches in the Agassiz beneath the surface of the sea. What I ask, what emotion wakens. Kali, beautiful. Nectis, swimmer. To tumble down layers of sense into the warring gardens, only to eat, to molt, to procreate. Salt sea mud breeding in the shoals. And then to come back, as from a museum, Goya barely bearable, as from Medea's grave mind. A taste of salt. I take up the crab in tongs. Dolphin. A slow storm coming from the Gulf. A rattling. Wind in palmettos or a gaunt bird's bill. Given ears and skin and eyes, nose and tongue. Given stories of arrival, the perfect birth, Alexander's tide, Caesar's. Oh, yearn, fear, portend, contrive, praise, deny, but not abstract. I've seen the reddened knees of students in winter, in shorts when there was merely a slant of cold sun, and once tentacle burns across the chest of a dead tourist. How blue the sea is. Box jellyfish too few and small to matter. Neurotoxins, pfft, well, on leeward mangrove branches, herons, egrets, yellow tridents rumbling far, far away. On the horizon, a small budge like the back of the giant Hermes dolphin. Salt, sparkling, dark come bearing.